Hello, welcome to a thing I'm doing. So, I've noticed lately that there's been a lot of talk about Sekiro Shadows Die Twice being excessively difficult. And it's true, I've played the game. I'm not quite done with it yet, and it is very, very challenging. It's almost to an absurd degree, I will say that. I really like the game, though. It's giving me the experience almost of playing one of these games, one of these From Software games that they've been making for the last 10 years, for the first time. I feel like I haven't experienced that learning curve in a long time, and it's nice to have it back. But, as always when a From Software game comes out, someone somewhere suggests, I think fairly in a way, that the game could have an easy mode. And it could have an easy mode. The real question is, should it? And David Thier, over on Forbes.com, suggested that Sekiro does need an easy mode, and that these Souls games, these FromSoft games, have needed an easy mode forever. I disagree, respectfully, with Mr. Thier. I think that he raises some good points, and I think that he raises some less good points. I think overall, though, that his conclusions that he draws from the evidence that he does have, I don't think that they necessarily support his claim, and I think he leaves out some critical things that he should be looking at that he doesn't. So, I wanted to sort of go through the article. I'm not going to read the whole thing, but we are going to mention its main points, and I just want to sort of identify and push back against some of the arguments that he makes and why I don't agree with them. So, this might be a fairly lengthy video because I am going to spend a decent amount of time on each point because I think it's important. I think it's important to have this dialogue. I think that a lot of people have responded with vitriol, which is the internet, so of course they do. That's to be expected. I don't think it's a good thing, but it happens. People have sort of mischaracterized these games in some of their responses, I feel like. Suggesting that these games are out to get you, that there's some badge of honor when you beat them, and that FromSoft just hates you and wants to, smash your face into a brick wall until you learn to love it. And I don't think that's true. And I do think that he raises some points that are good. And I think it's important that we don't throw the baby out with the bathwater. There's a truth to this article, I think. And I know people hate that. People hate nuance. To them it sounds like, centrism or being a moderate. Everyone wants you to pick a side. And I do have a side. I think that he's wrong. I think that an easy mode would ruin these games in a lot of ways. But I think that the points he does raise are worth discussing because they are points. So, he starts off his article sort of talking about the community in a way that I think is dumb. I mean, he starts with his claim that it needs an easy mode. And there's nothing to disagree with there. It's just a claim. His claim, as written, is it was true of all other From Software games, and it will keep being true until the only acceptable conclusion, one of these games, finally puts it in easy mode. So that's the claim. You may disagree with it, but there's no evidence presented yet. So you can't really, in good faith, have a discussion based on that. He has just made a claim, and that is his right. So, I disagree, but let's see how he supports this claim. So, he suggests that the community is a group of people who use these games as a litmus test for whether someone is a true gamer or a filthy casual. And that is, that's a meme. It's not really the community. Those are shitposts. People know that if someone asks, like, a very detailed and non-obvious question, like, I don't understand how infusion works in Dark Souls 3, someone will inevitably post, get good. And that's a joke. And it's meant to be taken as such. There are people who absolutely are elitists about these games, which is absurd, because these games are easier than most action games on hard mode. They're not that hard. They're hard, and there's no difficulty option, but they aren't unbelievably hard. Like, people go into these games. I remember someone went into Dark Souls once, and they just kept trying to fight. I've heard the story where they just kept trying to fight the Asylum Demon with their broken sword, because they're like, well, this is Dark Souls, it's supposed to be hard. They didn't realize that you're supposed to run from it and go get your real weapon, you know? So, these games are not that hard. They can be shockingly hard if you're not prepared for it. If you go in thinking it's going to be easy, they will surprise you. But if you go in thinking it's hard, it's going to be about what you think it's going to be. I get where he's coming from. There are people in the communities of these games who are elitists, who are annoying. But 90% of the time, most people just want to help you. They really are passionate about these games. And when you come in with a question, when you come in with a problem, they want to say, hey, yeah, let me tell you how I would beat it, or let me try to give you some advice. The problem is a lot of people are also coming in specifically to vent, you know, like they've been trying a boss for 20 tries and they just want someone to be like, yeah, that boss is tough, and like agree with them. And you'll have a bunch of people trying to like solve their problem, right? You'll have a bunch of people like, well, you just gotta block more, you just gotta parry him, or you just gotta roll to his left and poke him in the butt. And it's like, well, yeah, but it's hard. I just want someone to agree with me that it's hard. The wires get crossed, because people, honestly, in the community are very willing to help. And it's the people who are elitists who get downloaded in these communities, at least on Reddit and GameFAQs. You know, those are the people who kind of... The community gets tired of them real quick. And I've been a member of this community for a long time. And that's not really us. That's a joke. It's a meme. We joke around about it. Do not let that put you off. We don't really think this is a litmus test. If you don't like these games, or if you can't play these games, we don't think less of you. We wish that you would join us, but we don't think less of you for it. Absolutely not. We don't think you're not true gamers. I mean, a lot of content creators on YouTube, a lot of friends I have that I, play video games a lot, they have never really had the time to sit down and plow through these games. They don't want to, or it's not for them. And I don't think they're not real gamers, So that's not really a thing. There's an update here that is interesting, because he gets into accessibility, difficulty, and how developers can think about these issues. And then he posts a tweet, too, where Ian Hamilton says, easy mode is a really blunt instrument. There are other ways. To start with, is worth looking at what the designer's intent is, what they want the players to experience. Many assume that From's goal is to make games that require a high skill bar. That's not true. Now, I don't know if that's not true. I think that's a dangerous place to get into when you're trying to speculate to people's motives or design goals. From Software wants you to feel a sense of accomplishment. They don't necessarily need a high skill bar for that, but that is definitely a component of that. So it's kind of a strange argument, that part. But he is absolutely right that an easy mode is a blunt instrument. My argument against basically this whole article can boil down to the fact that an easy mode is not the right way. So as a little preview to something I'll be discussing more deeply later, I agree 100% with Ian Hamilton. An easy mode is an axe when you need a scalpel. An easy mode is a way to not have to worry about accessibility. It's a way for developers to create a mode that you can beat without the game having to give you the ability to remap the controls to something more comfortable for you, and whatever your physical limitations might be. Or for the game to not have to worry about, providing you with meaningful access based on your disabilities. Things like, text size changes or anything you can think of that would improve the accessibility of a game, they can avoid by just making the game so easy that you can walk through it. And that, to me, is not the accessibility that most people with disabilities that I know at least want. And easy mode is just saying, here, get through it by, just walking forward to the next objective marker. And that to me, it's not insulting. I think I made it sound way more insulting than it is. But it is the cheapest possible way to actually add accessibility. So it's not an accessibility argument, and that's the problem, is he tries to stake this argument on the idea of accessibility, and I think he misses it by a mile, because his arguments aren't really about accessibility, it's about an easy mode. And those aren't necessarily the same. It's not a zero-sum game where making the game possible for people with physical limitations to play necessarily means that you have to make it easier or add a mode that makes it easier for everyone. He goes on to talk about how he does love these games. There are other difficult games he won't play, but he thinks the difficulty is only a small part of what makes these games awesome. And I do agree with him. I don't know that it's not the most important part, which is something that he argues. That is very personal. For me, the difficulty is a huge part of what I like about the Souls games. It's not because I like being frustrated. I think that a lot of people who don't get it, they're not like in the camp of people who like these games. They don't get it, and they think they get frustrated when they play games. They have really, really hotly negative emotional reactions when they play these games, and when they lose in video games, which is fine. That's not unnatural. I don't really have anything to prove. You know, I'm not young enough to care about my gamer cred. I guess, you know, they're more important thing. I care about my credit score. I care about my taxes. I don't really care if I lose in a video game. I don't have that much time to play these games. I have a pretty busy life, but I do like to play them. You know, I don't mind chipping away at it for a while. And I think that this argument that the difficulty is sort of not an important part, or at least not the most important part, which is what Mr. Thier says. I disagree. I would not be attracted to these games in the way that I am without that challenge. So that's very personal. I'm just suggesting that for him, that may be true, and then that does sort of make his whole argument make a bit more sense. But we'll get into that. Best world building in the business, he says. Best character design. I agree. In large part, I think that is a major thing that From Software has always done well, especially in the last decade or so. Most people that like to see this sort of thing will never see that. I disagree that most people who like to see that will not see it. I do not think the Souls games in particular are that hard. I think Bloodborne is hard for people with certain physical limitations. Like, it's fast. The same with Sekiro. It is very fast. Souls, I do think if you have physical limitations, you're not great at mashing buttons or timing things, I still think that you can play Dark Souls. It will take a while, you know, and you're gonna have to work harder, just like everything in your life. If you're disabled, you're gonna have to work harder than everyone else to get that. I think most people who want to experience Dark Souls can. He goes on to say maybe they're just not good at timing their parries. Maybe they get frustrated. He's talking specifically about Sekiro now. I'm sorry, I kind of skipped over that. Maybe they get frustrated and don't feel like being frustrated just now. These are games that will frustrate you. Even if you are like me, I pride myself on having a pretty slow temper. I don't get easily frustrated, but when I do, it is hard for me to unwind myself from that. So when I feel it sneaking up on me, you have to take a break. Even like I said, if you're someone who doesn't really get that frustrated, you will eventually get frustrated because they are tough and they expect a lot from you. Maybe they have a physical element that makes this sort of precision just too difficult to pull off. Again, we'll talk about this later, because I want to sort of put my points at the end of this. But I think this is a point in this piece that I agree with. And I think From Software and all video game developers can and should do more to be accessible to people with physical disabilities. And I don't think that we're there yet, though I will actually say I believe that Sekiro is the most accessible game From Software has ever made. And we'll get into that a little more later, too. An easy mode would allow an order of magnitude more players to see what From has built. Yet these experiences remain walled off for those millions of people for reasons I just can't parse. I doubt there's millions. These games sell well. There's only so many people you can sell video games to. He's suggesting that these games would sell like GTA 5 if they were easier, and I don't think that's true. They're still niche. This is a smallish Japanese developer, very anime-inspired games. They're not anime in looks, but they are sort of inspired in that same sort of like Japanese sensibilities. These are not going to be games that the FIFA players are going to come play if they're easier. But he is right. More people would experience them if there was an easy mode. The question is whether or not that experience would be worth it. And it wouldn't be. It really wouldn't be, because easy Dark Souls would be a completely different game than normal Dark Souls. And it would not, in my estimation, be a good game. You see, Dark Souls relies on the dopamine rush that you get from overcoming a challenge, from getting wise, from adapting to what the game expects of you. And all of the From Software games over the last 10 years, the Soulsborne games, and now Sekiro, these games all require a lot from you, but they wouldn't be good games if they were easy. And that sounds shocking. They would still have good world building. They'd still have good art design. There would still be good elements. But I do not believe that these games would be a worthy experience if they were easier. From didn't make these games hard because that was something they wanted to do, or just on a whim because they felt like hard games are fun, or whatever. They made these games hard because that was a central aspect of the design. These games are not the same if they are easy, in my opinion. Now, I'm not suggesting that hard is good necessarily, and that's sort of the thing that I think we as the Souls community, to the extent that I can speak to that community, I don't think that's something that we should be saying, because I like games that aren't hard. Most of you who have played these games probably also have games that you like that aren't hard. You know, I like Dragon Quest. I don't think Dragon Quest is hard. I like Final Fantasy. I don't think Final Fantasy is hard. Final Fantasy is one of the easiest game series out there. So for me, hard doesn't make a game good. But for the Souls games, they're designed to be hard. Their combat systems would fall flat if they weren't hard, because the core of the combat system is simple. It's a simple design, but it's a design that requires precision in a way most games don't. And that's something I really appreciate, because it's taking something that shouldn't be hard, because there's not really much to it, but it's requiring that you master it in a way that most games don't require that. I think that's sort of genius in a way, because it lets them make the game simple, because the simpler it is, the easier it is to master, and the more mastery you get from each fight, the more you can sort of get to that place where you're mastering each fight. You don't have to learn like calculus. It's not like a fighting game where you have to learn combos or you have to learn tech. You just have to learn the 3 or 4 tools that you have that the game gives you. You know, blocking, parrying. You don't even have to learn parrying, really, but blocking, dodging, attacking. It's a very interesting game mechanically because it's hard. If it were easy, it would be bad. That is my argument. That doesn't mean I think that these games are bad in every way or something. Like, people seem to think that that's like sacrilege. Like, you're like, oh, so all it is the difficulty that makes them good. And that's like saying all that makes a painting good is you know, the visual aspects. You know what I mean? It's absurd. So, From Software uses difficulty to make art. I'm not saying that the games aren't artistic in other ways, or wouldn't still have good qualities, but they would be bad games. That is my argument. If they were not, From Software knows what they're doing when it comes to how they sort of tune their difficulty. That doesn't mean they don't overtune it sometimes or undertune it sometimes. There are fights that are way too easy, fights that are way too hard, fights that are just frankly unfair in some of the games. You know, some of the games are not tuned well. Some of the fights in some of the games are not tuned well. But the overall level of difficulty is right where it should be, and From is sort of the master of finding the breaking point, I think, for the average player where they can just barely keep up. At least at first. And you start to slowly gain mastery. And that's what it's all about. It's about sort of overcoming. He goes on to explain that Sekiro is worse because it doesn't have summoning to help you with bosses. And I would also add to this that it doesn't have builds either, and farming, which can help you with bosses. But he doesn't mention that specifically. That's me saying that. I don't want to put words in his mouth. I do think that he's right about this. The Souls games could be beaten by anyone because you could summon your way through the whole game, which I think is fine. But yeah, you can summon help, and that's something that is not in Sekiro. And he talks about beating your head against the wall or stopping playing. I was able to beat the Chained Ogre without too much trouble, he says, even without the fire thing. And maybe I could still keep doing well in this game. But I do not like the idea of coming up against a boss that I can't beat without a week of frustration, and so I can't let myself get obsessed with this one. So there is no boss that is going to take you a week. I mean, that's absurd. Like, he's painting this game to be even more difficult than it is. Like I said at the top of this discussion, this game is hard almost to a degree. Like, when I first fought Lady Butterfly, it was an early boss in this game. I don't want to spoil too much. That's why I'm not showing gameplay of Sekiro. I don't want to spoil this too much, so maybe close your ears for the next 30 seconds if you haven't played the game. You don't want to know anything about it, but there's a boss and you kill her, and she's pretty challenging. And then it turns out all you killed was, I guess, an illusion of her. And then she appears for real and summons a room full of people to kill you who are illusions. And those people are easy to avoid, and you can kind of just run around until they disappear. But even after I kind of figured that out, I still thought, like, it's over. From Software has lost their damn minds. There's no way this is going to happen. This is actually impossible. That's what I thought. And I am a Souls player. I went into this expecting to get my ass beat. Miyazaki said this is going to be harder than Dark Souls. That's what he said, and I believed him. And he was right. And I thought they lost their minds. I really did. But I did beat her. And it took me more tries than I'd care to admit. But it was not a week. I mean, there's no boss that's going to take you a week. Maybe some of the bosses, if you're really having trouble, but you will get it eventually. I mean, he's making this game out to be, like I said, like, people make Dark Souls out to be so hard that people didn't even realize you were supposed to get a weapon before fighting the boss. Like, that was the intended progression route. So people were sitting there throwing themselves at the Asylum Demon with a broken sword. People like him make these games out to be so much harder than they actually are. They are hard, but they are not that hard. They are possible. They are within the realm of possibility for an average video game player. If you are brand new at video games, or maybe you just play shooters, or you just play one type of video game, you don't really play any other type of video game, this game might present more of a challenge to you. And likewise, if you are a very experienced action gamer, you are very experienced on playing hard modes of all sorts of action games, or even playing Dark Souls and doing challenge runs and things like that. Like, you're gonna find this game different and maybe challenging in some ways, but you're not gonna spend a week on a boss. Like, no one's gonna spend a week on a boss. Like, if you're spending a week on a boss, 90% of people will not have that experience. Even if you have, like, physical ailments that prevent you from playing this game well, I think you will be able to figure something out in a day or two at maximum. So yeah, I don't think that's a good argument because it's hyperbole, and that's sort of like, to me, it sort of hurts his whole thing, because that's absurd. A week? No. Then it comes to sort of what he named the article after, and this is sort of the reason for the clickbaity title. I don't really have a problem with writing a good headline is very critical in this industry. The industry of writing, especially games writing. You want to be able to grab people. You want to be able to hook them. I don't think that it's necessarily honest, or it's necessarily always well done, but I can forgive a clickbait title like this if it's from someone who is at least writing an article that has something to say. And this one does. So it's fine by me. There's a lot of talk about respecting the player, Mr. Thier says. When it comes to not including an easy mode, an idea that all players can and should play this game in this particular punishing way. So what he's talking about here is a lot of Souls fans, like when Dark Souls 1 came out, I remember, like, the way I was convinced to play it was people said, like, it doesn't hold your hand, it respects you. It respects you to figure out what you need to do to win. It doesn't sit there and just, shower you in sparklies and kill enemies in these awesome cinematic ways because you're someone who needs to be constantly, drip-fed dopamine. It lets you fail, and it lets you experience victory in a way that you're not used to in games. And that's true. And that's what people mean by respecting the player. They mean not hand-holding. And so that was sort of a common theme of what a lot of people, how they would recommend the original Dark Souls, if you remember that. I don't know. They talked about that respect, that idea of respect. So he's kind of twisting that here and saying that what they mean when it not, there's a lot of talk about respecting the player when it comes to not including an easy mode. I've never heard anyone say that in that way, but I'm sure that someone has. I don't disagree with them. And then he says an idea that all players can and should play this game in this particular punishing way. So the argument is that the game respects you for this, for playing, it respects you by forcing you to play in a certain way. Which I don't think is what people mean by respecting the player. Like I said, he's been probably talking to people, and people say stupid shit like this, like without thinking. No offense to those people. I don't think that they're stupid people, but they say things sort of off the cuff. Everyone does it. So maybe there is someone who told him that you have to play this game the way FromSoft designed because they respect you or something. But that doesn't really follow. I'm not sure where that's coming from. Anyway, I don't want to get too hung up on that. I think it's just a weird thing that he said that I can't quite figure out the meaning of. Like, I kind of know what he's trying to say, but I don't... It's just a weird way to say it. He says that the lack of an easy mode showcases the exact opposite. It shows a disrespect, I guess. Yes, stunning lack of respect is what he calls it. The idea that they cannot be trusted with their own gameplay experience. That even those who want a challenging game would somehow be lured by the siren song of lower difficulties and destroying their own experience because they're too impatient or immature to know what they actually want. I will say this. There are people who would be, stuck on a boss for 10 hours and then go play it in an easier difficulty. That would happen. But that is not the concern of me or people like me who disagree with this article. I'm not sure where he's getting that. I'm sure someone has made that argument to him before. I'll give him that. I have to assume that it's coming from a place of honesty. I have to assume that he's not being disingenuous. But that is a real straw man right there. Like, I'm not worried about an easy mode because it would destroy my experience. I'm worried about an easy mode because I think that you would hate Dark Souls if you play Dark Souls on easy mode. Like, I think that if you reviewed Dark Souls and you decide to play it on easy mode so you can get done with it real quick to review it, like most reviewers do, I'm not saying you, I'm saying the anyone in general. I think they would have a shit time. I don't think the game would be good. I talked about that before, how the hard difficulty to me is a major component of what makes these games interesting and what makes these games good. So why would you give someone a crappy version of something on purpose? I guess my argument would be, Titanic is a really long movie, right? James Cameron's Titanic. It's like 4 hours long or something. I don't actually know how long it is, but it's somewhere up there. I remember there was like an intermission for it in movie theaters. That's how long it was. They don't have intermissions anymore. They didn't have intermissions then either. It was that long. It was a long-ass movie. It was a good movie, by most accounts. I thought it was pretty good. Kind of, it wasn't perfect, but it was a good movie. It had great special effects for the time. Had a good love story. But it's long. It takes 4 hours to see that movie. That's a long time. Does that movie disrespect your time? Because it needs that time and it uses that time well. It's not like it's long for the sake of being long, but it needs to be long. It needs to be long to work. So my argument would be if you made a 35-minute long Cliff Notes version of Titanic, would that be Titanic? And my answer is no. It would be shitty. It would not be a good movie if you just cut together Titanic into a 35-minute long movie that hit all the major plot beats. It wouldn't have the character development. It wouldn't have the tension building. It wouldn't have that sort of like the elements like of class that are going on in that movie. And honestly, there's a lot of interesting sort of subplots and things going on in that movie sort of beneath the surface that just wouldn't happen. That would be fundamentally a different product, a different experience. And James Cameron is under no obligation to make you a 35-minute long version of Titanic because you don't have the time for the full thing. You might really not have the time. Like, you might be a busy person. But if you don't have the time, then you can't watch it because it's not going to be good. You're not going to like it. It's going to be an inferior version. And heaven forbid if you're a reviewer of movies and you decide to watch that version to review the whole movie, you're not going to have a good time. Now, it's not the same thing. I'm drawing sort of a false equivalency, and I recognize that. This is not exactly the same, but it is, I believe, so critical to these From Software games the last decade or so, since Demon's Souls. The difficulty is such an important component of these games that I honestly think that you would be playing a different game and potentially, and I should say, I truly believe, probably a much worse version of these games. So, there are games that need easy modes that can have easy modes. I absolutely 100% think that easy modes are fine. But I think that in a From Software game, in these particular games, an easy mode, it's just not a good idea, because I don't think it would be a good game. I think you would be better off beating your head against the wall of difficulty than playing an easy mode. That's how bad I think it would be. I think you'd have no fun with an easy mode in these games. I want to move on from this particular topic, because he does mention that the summoning system is an example of this. He said he never used it while playing Bloodborne, because I knew what experience I wanted, but I didn't get as into Dark Souls 3, and so I used it liberally. So, yeah, I mean, I can see that. I don't think that really supports his example that well. Like I said, I don't have anything against anyone summoning for anything in these games. These games are hard. Different people have trouble with different bosses. If you tried like a boss like 30 times, 50 times, you just didn't get it, summon help. Move on. There's more to the game. You have more to do in the game, you know? Now, it's different if you just really want to kill that boss. Like, I remember one of the bosses, I really wanted to kill Gale on my own. I really wanted to kill Lorien and Lothric on my own. Nameless King. I'm talking specifically about Dark Souls 3 because that's what he mentioned. There are bosses that I wanted to kill on my own. But other bosses, you know, like I've had bosses in Dark Souls 2 and in Bloodborne where it was just kind of like, I kind of want to play with my friends, or I just don't really care that much. This boss doesn't seem that interesting, so I'll summon someone in. There are a lot of bosses like that. He goes on to talk about Celeste, which is what everyone always brings up recently, since Celeste has launched, when they talk about this problem. Celeste is in the Masocore genre. I'm not sure what that means. I've never heard of that. But it is, I guess, like a genre of difficult platformers. Newsflash, all platformers are difficult. Like, I've never played an easy platformer. I probably have, but I can't think of one. Maybe Little Big Planet. Platformers are hard. It's shipped with extensive accessibility options, and that's true. You know, I didn't play the game, but I've heard a lot of good things about it. I don't think that is the same. The reason I don't think it's the same is because if you played that game and you were able to tune that game's difficulty to somewhere where it was easier and you thought that it was still a good game, then I think that you fundamentally had an experience that cannot be compared to Dark Souls, because Dark Souls, like I said, the difficulty is baked in. It's part of the core identity of the game, and it's not just that, it's part of what the game needs to be to function properly. I think you can have fun in some games by cheating or by, you know, turning down the difficulty. Like, I think Skyrim's a good example. Like, console commands and mods make that game fun, and a lot of them are overpowered, and that's fine. Like, it's a big, you know, power fantasy. It's great. If you want to crush everything in one hit, that's fun in Skyrim. That would not be fun in Dark Souls. Now, I'm not saying that that's necessarily what it wants to do, and I do think that an assist mode like that, where it's very clearly marked that you aren't playing the game the way you should, basically the way the developers intended, I think if you're going to include an easy mode in a game that is about being difficult, that is the way to do it. But I honestly don't think that that's a good comparison. I think that brutally challenging platformers and a From Software game have nothing in common except for the fact that they're both hard. But they're hard for different reasons. They're hard in different ways, and that hardness means different things to the core experience of games. That's what I'll say. So I don't think that this is like a one-to-one comparison, like where you can be like, it's sort of like my Titanic example. I think my Titanic example is a better version of this. This is a false equivalency. So then he goes on, well, I'll never understand about From's fanboys and their continual aggressive insistence at the mere presence of an easy mode would somehow compromise a special experience. Don't call people fanboys. Like, see, to me, this makes the whole thing kind of fall apart. Like, you had me, I was kind of understanding some of the things you were saying and where you were trying to come from. I respected some of your arguments. I disagreed with you. But then you got to say I'm a fanboy for my continual aggressive insistence that the mere presence of an easy mode would somehow compromise a special experience. Like, I believe that's true. I don't think I'm being aggressive. I will probably continue to insist that until I am convinced otherwise. I am entitled to my opinion, as you are entitled to yours. From Software has clearly over the years agreed with me more than you. I'm not saying that they're necessarily perfect or anything, but clearly there's a reason that there's not an easy mode, and I don't think it's because of rabid fanboys or something. So this is just a straw man. It's a personal attack. It's nothing. This is a complete waste of an argument. It's a waste of space in this article, and it frankly hurts the article overall because this person, he's making a straw man, and this is where I think that a lot of people reading this article, a lot of reasonable people, there's people who saw this article and just immediately decided to go on a rant, right? They were immediately pissed. There's people who read this article, though, to see like, hey, you know what? Fine. Let's see what you got. And they probably were reading it and saying like, you're making some good points. And they came to this and they were like, well, you're an asshole. This is what convinces me that this article is actually not designed to convince anyone of anything. It is presented as though it is a persuasive argument, as though it is meant to change people's minds and to win them over. But instead, what it actually is it's a preaching to the choir article. This is an article for all the people who don't get why the Souls games are so beloved, who get frustrated by them and just kind of don't really get them, to come in and scratch their heads and say like, yeah, exactly. This is bad. I would never tell Mr. Thier that he's, a filthy casual. I would never say that to him. I'd never say that about someone who doesn't like From Software games or who thinks they need an easy mode. But he says that I would say that, and then he also calls me a fanboy, which fanboy is, it's just a stupid term, People misuse it so often that it doesn't even make sense anymore. So he says it's worth saying time and time again, an easy mode does not have to change the core experience in any way at all, period. I agree, except for the fact that people playing the easy mode will have a compromised core experience. It will be a bad core experience. It will be a bad experience. Playing a version of Sekiro that had an easy mode would theoretically be completely identical to playing Sekiro now. I think that he's saying a version that had an easy mode if you didn't pick the easy mode. I'm not 100% sure. But I believe that's what he means. If that is what he means, that would make sense. The continued insistence that the easy mode would somehow affect the normal mode seems to represent a player's lack of respect for themselves, an idea they would not be able to play the game that they want without ruining it for themselves. Again, this is not the argument. This has never been the argument. No one I know has ever made this argument. It wouldn't affect me at all. I just don't think that the game would be good. I think it would be like playing a bad game. An easy mode in these games, in my opinion, is just my opinion, that's all I can do, would be a bad mode. It would be like an entire part of the game that just sucked. It has nothing to do with my respect for myself. It has nothing to do with me thinking that it would affect me personally. I just don't think it would work. I think it would be a waste of damn time. And so I say to From fans, believe in yourself. So again, this article sort of pivots around this idea that me as a From fan, or a fanboy as he would call it, an elitist as he would probably call me. And again, this is where me and Mr. Thier, this is where I start to really hate this article, because he doesn't land well. He says, believe in yourself. Know that you can play the game you want to play, even if others are playing the game they want to play. Again, it's completely not about that. An easy mode does not have to be complicated. Ideally, I'd like to see the sort of deeper customization that Celeste has, but all you need to do is turn up the damage the player does, turn down the damage the enemies do. That's it. Okay. So, this is where he sort of, I think, shows his hand. It doesn't have to be complicated, just turn up the damage, turn down the damage the enemies do. So let's get back to this accessibility thing, because his strongest argument is accessibility. Accessibility is great. It's something we should all strive for. Video games are, let's face it, they're like a generation behind on most other mediums and software and the world in general when it comes to accessibility for people. Accessibility is great. Of course, there's going to be people who you can never make something accessible enough that they will be able to play it. Like, no one who's blind is mad that they can't play Sekiro or any video game. They're blind. They get that. It's not a shock to them that a highly visual medium is going to be not accessible to them. That's not like, no one's saying that everyone has to play these games, but accessibility is something that can always be improved. So, for example, I made the claim earlier that Sekiro is the most accessible FromSoft game, and the reason for that is simple. If you go to the options menu on whatever system or console or computer you're playing it on, you will see completely remappable controls. So if your pointer fingers aren't so good at timing out those blocks and those attacks, you can change that now. That's a huge deal. It shows that From Software cares about this. I think that you could add even more. I think a toggle option for certain things, like for your hold, when you hold down the square button or the X button on Xbox to suck up coins and items from around you. I think like a toggle option for that, or just making the player click it once and just sucking them all up, not making people hold that. I think you could even introduce a toggle for the block. I know that would be weird for a lot of people. It might actually make the game harder, but it would make it easier for certain people to play it. I think that there should be text size options in the game. I think that there should be hearing impaired subtitles in the game, because some people, those chimes and the noises that you hear in combat are important. They could have, some more visual cues based on that in the subtitles for that. That will make the game more accessible. There's no colorblind mode. I don't think there really needs to be, but you could have options for like the alert indicators having some sort of colorblind mode if that's necessary. I don't think it is, because you're still going to see yellow and red as different colors, yellow, red, and white. So I don't think that's as necessary, but it is like, there's always more you can do. And no company should be attacked for not doing more. But let me tell you what the easiest thing to do is. And it's like I said earlier, it's you slap on an easy mode, and you tell that person who's disabled that they get to play it on baby's first video game mode. That's not accessibility, man. I mean, if that's about helping disabled people experience the game, that's not what that does. That gives them a mode that isn't designed for them. Now, Celeste going in deep, giving you all sorts of different control options, that's cool. That's something I respect. And that's something that most games, I think, should do. God of War and Spider-Man, and those are both Sony exclusives, and for some reason, both those games have really great accessibility options. They're not incredible. They didn't think of everything. They could be better. But they are really great compared to that game's contemporaries. Accessibility is amazing. It's something that we should support. But it's something that is hard to do for developers, because it is the sort of thing that you kind of have to design for from, I don't want to say from the first step of development, but I do know personally, having worked on certain projects, I do know that accessibility is challenging. It is not as easy as people think, but it is very rewarding. If the argument is that Sekiro or any game could or should be more accessible to people with physical limitations or disabilities, I 100% agree. I think there's ways to do that, though, without actually changing the difficulty all that much, without making the game easy, without fundamentally changing the experience that people have playing the game, without giving them a second-class version of the game. A version of the game that, in my opinion, would be bad. I think that a lot of developers create easy modes specifically because they want people to be able to play games, but they don't want to have to account for the real work of accessibility. And that's got to change. So this guy coming in and saying a simple, easy mode that turns damage down that enemies do and turns player damage up, that's all I want. That just sort of exposes to me that what he really wants is he wants to be able to be better at Sekiro, because he likes the world. Personally, he likes certain aspects of these games, and he wants to be able to play it. And I totally get him. He wants to not have to invest his whole life learning to play this damn game. Now, obviously, I'm being hyperbolic, the game is not going to take your whole life to master, but I mean, you are learning a skill that ultimately doesn't matter. And I get that. People like to joke that you could, like, learn a language instead of learning to play one of these hard games. And it's true. You could spend that 30 or 40 or 50 hours, however long it takes you could spend it better. But you're getting entertained. And I think the thing is, he kind of exposes himself at the end because he's very clearly... He's made all the arguments he could possibly make. He's touched on accessibility, but he doesn't really drive that home. He sort of compares it to the other FromSoft games, suggests that they basically had an easy mode, even though at the beginning, the summoning he mentions, even though at the beginning he suggested that they didn't and should have. So that kind of like destroys his argument. He's saying these games that had an easy mode were too hard, basically. And it's just... The end of the article, just to me, it really falls apart when he starts name calling. He starts these attacks on people that disagree with him. It's almost bizarre because I feel like he could have stood on accessibility and made that a really compelling argument, because it is a compelling argument. But instead, he just kind of turned the whole thing into an attack on people who disagree with him. And when you're doing that, that's wrong. You lose an argument when you do that, No one's going to agree with you. Because even people that maybe agree with him on the easy mode thing, that are From fans, now they're looking at this going like, man, you're just attacking people. You're attacking members of my community that helped me get through hard boss fights. This is a tight-knit community. You can jump on Reddit or GameFAQs if you're having trouble with a boss from Dark Souls 1 on PlayStation 3. If someone will boot up their PlayStation 3, dust it off, and jump in and help you beat a boss, in co-op. They don't do that for the Souls. They don't do that really even for the fun. They just do that because, why not? People are very helpful in this community, and I think that, I think he has unfortunately probably experienced the bad side of the community having opinions like this, unfortunately, because people, it's the internet, people are shit. The point I'm trying to make is that accessibility is worth it. But an easy mode is not accessibility. It's fake accessibility. There's no one that I know who's a disabled person who wants a mode of Dark Souls that's just easier. They usually have specific limitations, and they need adaptations for that. Microsoft's doing great work with their adaptive controller. I would like to see Sony, because they have the biggest install base. I would like to see them invest some money in it, but they probably won't, because they're on top right now, so they don't really have to innovate, and that's unfortunate. I think that From Software is paying attention to this issue. Proof is in the pudding. The game has tons of onboarding, Sekiro. It's clear that they want this game to be more accessible. It's clear that they care about accessibility. And that is a really, really good thing. And I applaud that. And I'm hoping that this is just a small sample of what's to come. I'm hoping that their next game has tons of options for people. I'm hoping their next game is the game that meets you where you're at more than any other. But as far as an easy mode, I don't think that's the answer. Now, that doesn't mean that a From Software game should never ship with an easy mode. They're not going to be making games like this forever. They're probably going to go back to making like an Armored Core game or something. Armored Core, it's a lot of fun. It can be challenging sometimes. But I don't remember if that game had difficulty modes, but I wouldn't say that the difficulty of an Armored Core game is going to be so core to the combat and so core to the experience that they can't have difficulty modes. I think From knows when they can get away with a difficulty mode, and I think when they can, you're going to see it. If there's no reason not to have a difficulty mode, why wouldn't you? It's not something that's super hard to implement. It's not something that's super easy to implement, especially if the game isn't designed for it from the ground up. But it's not something that you couldn't implement. So, I don't know. I mean, like I said, Mr. Thier's article here is an article that on one side, I think he raises good points, and I think it's important not to throw the baby out with the bathwater. I think that his mentions, I assume his legitimate and genuine care for people who have issues, physical disabilities, not being able to experience these games. I support that. I think that From can do more. I think that the industry can do more, and I hope it does. But I think that he sort of shoots himself in the foot by going after a really bizarre sort of solution. And I want to go back real briefly to Mr. Ian Hamilton, who responded to Mr. Thier by saying, an easy mode is a really blunt instrument. And that's true. You can have an easy mode, but I don't think an easy mode is necessarily what these games need. You can also have a game that feels rewarding and challenging without necessarily making it so balls to the wall hard that you have to parry all attacks all the time, which is not exactly what Sekiro is, but it's pretty darn close. It's a tough game. I don't think that Sekiro needs to be as hard as it is. I don't think that it would be a worse game if, for example, the grab attacks didn't like teleport you into their hands because you didn't dodge late enough. Things like that, like these games have their issues that make them sort of unfairly hard sometimes. Sekiro certainly has its issues. It's not a perfect game in terms of difficulty. I think the difficulty curve is completely off. The game starts off way too hard, hits an awesome stride in the mid-game, and then sort of just goes off a bridge and gets insanely difficult very quickly in a way that is, in my opinion, less fun than any other Souls game I've played, because, except for maybe Dark Souls 1, because Dark Souls 1 sort of ran out of things to kill you with and just started using gravity over and over again, like everything was like invisible bridges, and, you can't see pits because it's really dark in here, and just all kinds of stuff like that. Like, the second half of Dark Souls is just the game trying to get you to walk off of cliffs instead of actually challenging you. This game is not that bad, but it is close because it gets so hard that it almost feels like the game is terrified that you might be good at it, and they just have to fuck you up one more time. They just have to get one over on you one last time. They just have to really, really cement that you're not as good as you think you are or something. That being said, I think it's more an issue with the actual curve of the difficulty. It feels like it's too abrupt and sudden, that the game just suddenly, it starts off very, very hard. It kind of calms down a little bit once you start getting better at it. All through the mid game for a long period of time, I was loving it for like 10 hours, 15 hours. It was great. It was like smooth sailing. I felt really good at the game. I felt that I was doing well. I was still dying, but I felt like I was learning. I felt like I was like sort of reaching the peak of the mountain, and then like the last act of the game gets real insane real quick. It's good. I don't want to say it's too hard, because it's possible that I'm just not as good as I thought I was in the mid game. But I do think that the difficulty curve could be changed. So it's not like I'm saying Sekiro is perfect. It's not like I'm saying it needs to be as hard as it is. I do disagree with Mr. Thier. I wish that at the end he hadn't gone off into ad hominem attacks. I wish that he asked for more than an easy mode. I wish that he focused on accessibility, because that's something that I can agree with him on 100%. But ultimately, I disagree. I do not think that Dark Souls or Bloodborne or Sekiro need an easy mode. I think that the game would not be completely ruined for me if they had an easy mode, but I do think that the people who played that easy mode would waste $60 if that's all they intended to do. I don't think it would be a good game. I don't think it would be a good experience. If you heard Dark Souls 4 is coming soon, it's by From Software, they're making another one, it's going to be tough, but they're adding an easy mode, and you're the kind of person who is like, I've been waiting to get into this series. If it has an easy mode, fine, I'll play it. And you play it, and you just play this game, and it's just really simple combat, and it's just kind of stilted, and it's kind of slow. And yeah, there's some lore and some weird shit going on, and, the enemy designs are cool and everything, but, like, it's just kind of boring. I feel like you'd be playing a pretty mediocre game. That's just me. I could be wrong about that. If they do introduce an easy mode, I guess we'll see. Maybe that would be the way to put it to bed forever. Maybe they'd release a game. Maybe they'd release Dark Souls 4 to have an easy mode, and people would be like, man, this is terrible without the difficulty. Or maybe people would be like, actually, you know what? Somehow, against all odds, This incredibly simple combat system still holds up and is still fun. I don't know for sure, but I can tell you as someone who's played all these games, played thousands and thousands of hours in these From Software games, I could tell you that I doubt it. That I doubt that they would be good games without the difficulty. And they're not that difficult once you get used to them. If you're concerned about the difficulty, don't be. You can get through these games. You gotta believe in yourself. I don't have to believe in myself. You gotta believe in yourself. You can do it. These games are not made for the 1% of super skilled gamers. They're games. They're designed for you to fail in them. And by acknowledging that failure and letting you fail and not pretending it didn't happen and kicking you back to your autosave, 3 seconds ago, by making your death mean something, they sort of give you a place where it's okay to fail. It's fine to die in a FromSoft game. You're going to die a lot. It's an interesting way to do that. You develop an interesting relationship with failure. If you're put off by these games' difficulty, don't be. You will get good at them. If you have a physical limitation or disability, I'd love to hear from you what your take on this is. I have not specifically talked to any of my friends who have disabilities about this specific issue, but I do actually know many people with physical disabilities, as I used to work as a home health aide. So I met a lot of people like that. And in all my talks with them, a lot of these people just wanted they wanted access to things, but they didn't want you to treat them like they were less anything. They didn't want special treatment. They just wanted you to make things possible for them. That's what accessibility was always about for them. And I have a disabled family member, and that's it's something that hits close to home. I really do care about this issue, the issue of accessibility. Now, if From Software came out of the game and it had an easy mode, I would not be angry or anything. If Sekiro 2 comes out and it has an easy mode, I would not be enraged. I just don't think I don't think that would be Sekiro. I think there's a reason that it's not included, and I think that's because a lot of people will play it. A lot of people will pick up the game and they will have bad experience. And that game I think it will have bad reviews. To Mr. Thier, my only suggestion is to try to construct your argument around something that can be defended, because I feel like the argument starts and ends with straw mans and ad hominems, and I feel like you're not going to convince anyone of anything that way, man. That being said, Mr. Thier, he wrote an article. There were points in there. There were parts to engage with. I don't think we should throw the baby out with the bathwater. I have respect for the man. I think he wrote a decent article. I think a lot of people shitting on him on the internet ought to be ashamed of themselves. We can have grown-up talks about these things, even in the gaming community. We're not a bunch of babies. We can talk about this. Anyway, that is it for this video, guys. I have a lot of Sekiro to get back to. Man, this is kicking my ass. That easy mode can't come fast enough, right?